Testing, testing, testing. I'm going live now. Live now. Live now. Just going to go check my streams real quick. Make sure everything's good. Test, test, test. This is me. I'm going to test the chat real quick. Let's see. Do you think AOC will be president? Did not work. What the heck? Chats aren't working. Oh well. Fuck it, we'll do it live. All right. Everything's all right. Okay. Welcome, 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 welcome. I am officially live. Going to be watching, excuse me, the video about AOC's presidency. And I'll be playing Pokopia, trying to get through this Rocky Ridge area so that I can get to Skyward Sword. Skyward Sword, Skyland. Mold. All right. Let's play this video, start reacting.
All right, I have one question I want you to think about throughout this video. Could Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez be the next president of the United States? I've actually been wanting to make a video about AOC for a while now, but I've had a really hard time pinning her down. Does she plan to run for president in 2028? Maybe she'll stay in her safe House district. Oh, Chuck Schumer's up for re-election in 2028. Maybe she'll run for his seat in the Senate.
Does that mean we can be friends? I bet it does. It's exceedingly energetic with enough stamina to keep running all through the night. Taking it for walks can be a challenging experience. Nice. All right, let's go. What are my goals here today? Make bread? Oh, that's right. Need to make an oven. Use a bread oven to make bread.
Instead, 2 out of 3 of these scenarios, I believe, are easy wins for AOC. But the presidency?
Yeah, I feel the same. I don't think AOC can win a bid for presidency. I just don't know if the majority of Americans would even want a woman president, to be honest. I just feel like there's a lot of sexism going around, but damn, Trump is so, like, historically bad that this could be what it takes to have the first female president. I mean, I don't see why not, you know? Shit, that's right. I need an oven. Anyways, I think, my opinion, she's better off taking Chuck Schumer's spot as senator. Because I actually think that if she gets in the Senate, she could function really well as maybe a majority leader. Maybe. I mean, she has leadership potential, name recognition. You know. All right.
It's a big hill to climb, but according to all of you, it doesn't sound all that crazy. Now, the past couple weeks, I've been running a survey for viewers of this channel, and it seems to me that there's 3 candidates that you all think could be the next president, at least the next Democratic nominee: Gavin Newsom, Jon Ossoff, and AOC. And public opinion polls have actually been backing this up. A recent Emerson poll, which is widely considered the most trusted in the space here, has pretty similar results, with some Pete Buttigieg and Kamala Harris thrown in the mix. But these numbers are still only giving AOC around a 10% chance of the nomination. Now, granted, that's more of a chance than most politicians in this country ever get in their lifetimes, so maybe it's worth going after. But at the same time, AOC is only 36. She'd be the youngest president in history if she won in 2028. On the other hand, Chuck Schumer, a deeply unpopular senator, would be a much easier candidate to defeat in 2028. A Data for Progress poll shows her winning by nearly 20 points, and working in the Senate would give her time in Congress to prepare a run for the presidency in 2032 or 2036. At the same time, though, it's also true that this may be AOC's only opportunity to run for president. Political history in this country is littered with examples of politicians waiting for the right moment to run for president, and then that moment never comes for them. So at a time when progressives across the country are beating out establishment figures like in Michigan with Abdul Sayed, Zohran Mamdani in New York City, and even congressional races in Colorado, this may be the one moment a true, unabashed progressive like AOC could blaze through the 2028 Democratic primary for president. And I think the general election for 2028 is shaping up to be pretty bad for Republicans. If the current approval ratings for the Trump administration hold up, it's looking more and more likely to me that a bag of rocks might be able to beat whoever the Republicans run. If I were AOC, I'd have a very hard time turning down a run for the presidency in 2028. Her biggest challenge is Democratic primary voters.
Win the primary,
As we know, there is a faction of the party that would love to vote for AOC. There's a faction that won't vote for AOC, but there's also a third faction that just wants the most electable candidate to win the election. These voters have been hesitant, to say the least, around the prospect of voting for AOC. Could she win them over? Let's find out. Man, I just gotta be honest, there is so much polling data to go through to understand AOC's future. So before we get to all of it, I thought it would be a good idea to go over the one simple dashboard in my life where the numbers are always current. This is Monarch, today's sponsor. I'll put this thing up in demo mode, not because I don't trust you guys with my actual financial numbers, just, you know. So I am not a check my budget every month kind of person, and I honestly think that's why this app has worked for me so well. Monarch syncs with over 13,000 banks, cards, and brokerages. So whenever I open it, whether it's at the end of the month or after a big purchase, everything is updated and already there for me. As you can see here, it's all on one clean dashboard. We can see all of my accounts, my spending, my net worth, my credit score even. And again, it's all tracked automatically. It's able to keep my fixed versus flexible spending separated with categories I customized once and have never had to set again. And if something in your budget really looks weird, the AI Insight will flag it and explain it to you in plain English. One of my favorite things is that Monarch is private and ad-free. You are the customer, not the product. And it's the same experience on web that it is on mobile. So start a free trial and get 50% off your first year with my link and code AIDEN50, which of course is on screen and in the description down below. A big thank you to Monarch for sponsoring this video and their continued support of the channel. Now, who actually is AOC? In case you're unaware exactly what role Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez holds in government, she's a representative of the Bronx in the House of Representatives. And that job did not come easy. AOC made a name for herself in 2018 when she ousted a 10-term Democratic incumbent in her district named Joe Crowley, which even today I think is one of the largest upsets in modern American history. She became the youngest woman ever elected to Congress at 29 years old and had a really great story for how she got there. After graduating college, AOC worked as a bartender in the Bronx at a place called Flat's Fix. She had done some advocacy work in that time, including protesting the Dakota Access oil pipeline, which got her some recognition with groups like Brand New Congress and Justice Democrats, who convinced her to run against Joe Crowley in her home district. There's actually a great documentary that was made during this whole process called Knock the House Down. You can watch on YouTube after this video. For now, I need you to like and subscribe and keep watching and all that. Hype? Maybe? Can you hype the video? Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. Her first year in Congress is marked by two things: confrontational media coverage and the Green New Deal. The latter was a bill she worked on with Senator Ed Markey, who, fun fact, is the guy in this picture.
Oh boy.
Yeah. When it came to the rollout of this Green New Deal legislation, to put it lightly, her office absolutely botched it. They accidentally released an FAQ document that contained several controversial proposals. These included infamously the seeming crisis of farting cows releasing methane into the atmosphere, which some took to the conclusion that the bill would ban beef. It also promised economic security for those, quote, unwilling to work, and proposed a range of policies that had projected costs of up to $93 trillion, according to outside groups. Bad first look. She famously butted heads with Nancy Pelosi during this term, who was Speaker of the House at that time. This was mainly because she wasn't granted certain subpoena powers and she disagreed with certain House rules that were put into effect that year. There were several Democrats in the House she was actively supporting primary challenges to, which many colleagues saw as, quote, open hostility. And of course, there was her Met Gala appearance, where she wore a tax the rich gown that was widely criticized for being hypocritical. It seems the left actually learned their lesson on this one, by the way. This most recent Met Gala, Zohran Mamdani, being the mayor of New York, was invited but refused to go to the event, which I think probably a good call. Okay, so all of this I would consider controversial behavior and circumstance, combined with constant negative coverage from mainstream and right-leaning news outlets, caused her to be defined by the American public early. And the numbers generally weren't great. A Gallup poll 2 months into her first term gave her a net favorability of negative 10 points nationally, which rose to negative 15 points in 5 months. By that time, over 70% of Americans could rate her. Now, for comparison, only 53% of Americans had any opinion of Barack Obama after his first 2 years in the Senate. That's according to Gallup by CNN, by the way. Republicans especially disliked her. I know, not a surprise there or anything, but she had a negative 68-point favorability amongst GOP voters. Not exactly a consensus candidate.
Bad,
But what about the years since? After all, by the 2028 election, all of that will have been basically a decade ago. After a relatively rough race to maintain her seat in 2020, AOC started to be more methodical with her appearances. She began to be more selective on the battles she took in public, and didn't make nearly as many media appearances outside of her own social media accounts. Even today, you'll be hard-pressed to find her on many of the podcasts and interview shows that other 2028 hopefuls go on. Don't expect an AOC Jubilee video anytime soon. But there are signs of something changing. AOC spent a decent chunk of 2025 going on the Fighting Oligarchy tour with Bernie Sanders, in a move that I think we can now characterize as Bernie passing the torch as the leader of the progressive movement to AOC. I think these speeches were them kind of refining their message and attempting to begin a takeover of the Democratic Party at a moment of crisis. Since then, she's been doing a lot more town halls in upstate New York. She's been doing rallies in Philadelphia. She was seen at a voting rights event in Montgomery, Alabama. And a few months ago, she even spoke at the Munich Security Conference, which has widely been seen as an effort to build her foreign policy credentials. All of these things combined, to me, point to her running for a national campaign. So what are her numbers now? Just 28% of voters, 18 to 34.
Yeah, when I say roasted, I mean like, they asked her a question about Chinese foreign policy, and she had a lot of ums and ahs for about like 20 seconds, and I'll admit it was not the best look. And then the answer was okay-ish. But Republicans were like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe! Can you believe AOC? She is so dumb." Meanwhile, you have Donald Trump going, "I'm going to take the state of Hormuz and turn it into a U.S. territory." Like, dude, your guy's out of control and says some of the most ridiculous shit imaginable. Like, we're talking about like the same guy who told people to put bleach in their body. Like, come on. Like, why can you, like, I don't know. It just seems funny that people are willing to criticize a vocal flub from a, for the most part, a pretty smart politician when they have to literally sanitize and wash everything Trump says, because it's a lot of the time just like nonsense. Anyways.
A favorable opinion of her, as well as 22% of independents. Now, I should say there are better numbers for her elsewhere. 56% of Democrats have a favorable view of her, but a recent article from Puck found that one of her strongest demographics, white voters with a college degree, gave her a favorability rating of 34%, but still had 45% of that group that found her unfavorable. Despite this, she is prolific. Coefficient found that 26% of likely voters name AOC as the face of the Democratic Party. That's higher than any other Democratic figure. And she polls incredibly well with Democratic primary voters in New York. This would be really good for her if she ran for the Senate. She is simultaneously the most vivid figure in the Democratic Party, and somehow also 10 points underwater with the country at large. So what's her pitch?
What's going on here?
Okay, I want to go over the pros and cons of AOC 2028. Let's start with the pros. I have 3. Number 1, a lot of things are just going right for progressives right now. I don't think I properly visualized the size of those fighting oligarchy tours we talked about. In total, the tour saw over 261,000 attendees, including 36,000 in Los Angeles and 34,000 in Denver, which is bigger than any Bernie Sanders campaign rally ever. Nobody else in the party is capable of these numbers right now. Number 2, she's young. The Democratic Party is constantly plagued by their decision to run Joe Biden for re-election in 2024, the oldest president ever elected at that time. AOC, as we mentioned, would be the youngest president ever elected in 2028, at 39 years old. According to DFP, Democratic voters say elderly leaders should pass the torch by a margin of 44 points. Number 3. She can wield the progressive machine. There is a giant infrastructure that's come into play since Bernie's 2016 campaign. It's a machine that supports progressive candidates. I'm talking about a very energized volunteer network, a massive small dollar list for contributions, and a lot of really talented campaign staff out there that will do whatever it takes to get a progressive elected president. There is nobody else in the party, aside from maybe Ro Khanna, that can mobilize this machine for the presidency like AOC. On Act Blue in the first half of 2025, AOC drew in the 3rd most small dollar donations in the entire party, behind only the DNC itself and the DSCC, and ahead of every other individual candidate. Party operatives have even told Axios that she'd raise $100 million from small donors alone in 2028. Okay, now for the cons. Let's do 3 again to make it even. Number 1, she seems to have a ceiling of support, especially if the public continues to associate her with socialism. As we mentioned, her favorability rating is in the negative. And according to Gallup, when asking voters if they'd support well-qualified candidates on different traits, socialist was the only trait on the list that drew majority opposition, 45%.
And that's why I won't vote for her. She's a socialist. She's endorsed crazy socialists in New York with Chauvignat, I can't say her name, and I'm sorry, but that lady is absolute bananas. I think she was like at, the October 7th attack, when Hamas attacked Israel and killed thousands of civilians. The day after, on October 8th, I'm pretty sure she was at a place celebrating that attack. So this is not, to me, a good person or a good candidate or someone that should be giving any serious power in the Democratic Party. She is fundamentally illiberal, as are all the socialists. There just cannot be a liberal socialist. It just doesn't work that way. Well, anyways, let's go.
Would support and 53% wouldn't. That same poll showed a theoretical support of 60% for atheists and 66% for Muslims. Although she makes the distinction of labeling herself a democratic socialist, her association with the group the Democratic Socialists of America, which is plagued by its own controversies, may weigh her down in the race. Number 2, she is, for all intents and purposes, a coastal elite. As a Californian myself, this is something that tends to pop up whenever a politician from out here wants to run in a national race. Recently, of course, this has come up in the discourse for Gavin Newsom in his bid to run for the presidency. But AOC faces the same problem, just from the other coast. When thinking about this, I can't stop thinking about the new Spider-Man movie, actually. I swear this ties back in. A Brand New Day became one of the highest grossing movies ever domestically in its opening weekend. And I think the reason Spider-Man continues to be so popular, even when other superhero movies aren't, is because of his relatability. Everyone can see themselves in him. How he struggles to balance all these different parts of his life while still trying to do the best he can in each and every one of them, and constantly has his attempts blow up in his face. But he keeps on trying. I think a lot of people see that in themselves. Politicians who can capture that do very well. Can AOC A few years ago, I think it was more plausible. After all, just like Spider-Man actually, she was a working person from a big city, New York, trying to do the most good that she could. But she's been arguably the most famous member of Congress for nearly a decade at this point. I'm not so sure she can run the same play anymore. Maybe I'm wrong though. It's not like her opponents have much ground here either. All right, let's come back to the third and final con. She doesn't seem to have a grasp on the attention economy. I should mention at this point that I do think AOC is a tremendous politician. She's very talented and very well spoken when she wants to be. And what I can only assume is a reaction to the bad press she got in her first few years in Congress. She has really taken a step back in the public appearances she does. You won't see her debating anyone on Jubilee, for example. This is not the case for other presidential candidates like Pete Buttigieg, Gavin Newsom, or Jon Ossoff. They are constantly doing interviews, podcasts, and Substack posts. And by doing all that, I think they have gotten better at becoming digital natives, better at honing their message and gathering attention when it benefits them. I think it would be smart for AOC to do the same. Remember that Munich event I mentioned earlier that AOC was a part of? Well, this was her answer to a question on her stance on protections for Taiwan.
You know, I think that this is such a, you know, I think that this is a, this is of course a very long-standing.
Okay, yeah, this was bad, sure. But the only way to avoid this kind of thing in the future is by doing a lot more of it. Gavin Newsom has made tons of public stumbles in the last few years, but everyone eventually just moves on to the next thing. Yeah, so those are what I think are the biggest pros and cons for AOC as a candidate. But there were recently some huge changes to how the Democratic primary even works, and it could really impact AOC. Oh, you know what? I just thought of a fourth con. She didn't like the video, and she didn't subscribe to the channel. If you were a progressive during the last two competitive Democratic primaries in 2016 and 2020, you probably remember not having a very good time, and probably now have at least some distrust for the larger Democratic Party. The 2016 primary battle between Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders was very close in the early states, with Iowa being decided by a literal coin toss, but there were so-called superdelegates in the party that gave Hillary Clinton an early advantage over Bernie Sanders in that contest. And then 2020 had its own problems. After the DNC lessened the impact of superdelegates in that race, progressives thought Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren might have an easier shot at getting the nomination this time around. After all, the establishment pick lost last time, but the establishment slash moderate wing of the party had another trick up their sleeve. After some pretty good performances by Bernie Sanders in early states like New Hampshire and Nevada, many remaining candidates in the race suddenly dropped out and endorsed Biden after his overperformance with black voters in South Carolina. This, of course, opened the door to Biden winning the nomination going into Super Tuesday. And let's not even mention the 2024 primary, or lack thereof, that allowed Kamala Harris to be effectively coronated as the 2024 candidate. So when it was announced last year that there would be some major changes coming to the Democratic primary for 2028, I think progressives had the right to be on edge. Those changes were made public the other week. So what's different? The DNC has proposed different states for early voting in the primary. Since the 1970s, Iowa has been the first state in the Democratic primary contest, but after a botched 2020 caucus where a software glitch held up the results for several weeks, of which Pete Buttigieg actually ultimately ended up winning, the state was cast out of the early voting window. So what's the new order of states? Leading the pack now is South Carolina, followed by Nevada, New Hampshire, New Mexico, Michigan, Virginia, and then Super Tuesday, which is when most states in the process will vote. Now, there really aren't that many primary delegates in these early states, but they set the narrative to the media and donors for which candidates have momentum. So what does putting South Carolina first mean for the field? What kind of Democrats vote there? The state's Democratic primary electorate has demographics that tend to lean more black and female than nearly every other state in the country, which on first glance you may think helps progressives. But amongst the Democratic electorate, the best voters for progressives tend to actually be white voters. This is why candidates like Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton, and presumably Kamala Harris do so well in South Carolina during primary season. So if one of the main arguments against AOC in this primary is that she's not electable, I think it would be helpful for us to run a trial scenario of how we think this would go with the 5 leading candidates. Now, I want to preface this by saying it's just a scenario of what could happen. and I'm going to be open to AOC doing well in some of these states. Some or all of these candidates might not even start up campaigns next year. And there could be other dark horse candidates that pop up, like Wes Moore or Raphael Warnock. But without further ado, let's run it. The 2028 primary season starts in South Carolina. The top 5 candidates going into this primary, who have really been campaigning and debating for well over 6 months at this point, are Pete Buttigieg, Jon Ossoff, Gavin Newsom, Kamala Harris, and of course, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. An interesting dynamic of these primaries is that the perceived momentum going into each state gives each candidate a baseline of how they will perform, at least for the media and political pundits, which at the moment is all that really matters. AOC, a progressive, would not be expected to do very well in South Carolina, but if she can do marginally better than some other candidates, it would be seen as outperforming expectations. Kamala Harris, on the other hand, would have to win here big and solidly. The remaining states are going to be harder for her. If she doesn't have momentum out of South Carolina, she will probably lose the nomination. In this scenario, I think this is exactly what happens. The results are as follows. 5th place is Pete Buttigieg, 4th is Gavin Newsom, 3rd is AOC, 2nd is Kamala Harris, and 1st place is Jon Ossoff. South Carolina is basically next door to Georgia, and much of Jon Ossoff's strength as a candidate is winning over very similar voters to those in South Carolina. And so out of this, things look very bad for Harris and Buttigieg. Despite promising debate performances, Pete Buttigieg can't shake his inexperience and ties to the Biden White House. Now for the next state, Nevada. Bernie Sanders performed very well here in 2016 and 2020. But AOC may have a harder time. Nevada, for the first time in 2028, will be operating as a primary, not a caucus. It's a different structure to vote for candidates in the Democratic primary, and for technical reasons we don't have time to get into, it tends to make it slightly harder for progressives to win on average. I think we can expect Harris to come in last here, followed by Pete Buttigieg, Gavin Newsom in 3rd, then Jon Ossoff, and in 1st, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Despite it being harder, AOC still comes out on top due to the wider, younger electorate in this state. At this point, Pete Buttigieg is considering dropping out of the race, and Harris isn't far behind. The next 2 states, New Hampshire and New Mexico, are both considered some of the most liberal primary electorates, according to Nate Silver. Again, AOC does very well here, but she is followed behind by Ossoff and Newsom, who have begun consolidating votes from Buttigieg and Harris, who promptly drop out after repeat underperformances. Really? At this point, there are 2 remaining states before Super Tuesday, Michigan and Virginia. These states are more of an even field for candidates across the board, with Michigan being slightly more progressive and Virginia being slightly more moderate. At this point, it's become clear Newsom or Ossoff would need to drop out for either to have a chance at winning a one-on-one contest against AOC. And to be honest, I think this one's up to the donors. Suddenly, the question is no longer if AOC is electable, but rather if anyone else is electable enough to stop her. If Newsom drops out, I think there's a clear path for Ossoff to get the nomination. But if Ossoff drops out, I think AOC suddenly has a very good chance of becoming the next president of the United States. I think it's becoming clear that this primary is going to be another fight between the establishment and the base. And I think the base has more fight in them this time, more than they've ever had before. Jon Ossoff, I believe, has a better chance of distancing himself from that establishment label than Newsom does. But to be honest, he's the candidate I'm least sure will run at all in 2028. We have a whole video talking about him you can watch here. So again, back to the question from the top of the video. Could Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez be the next president of the United States? If you believe basically any Democrat could beat a Republican in the next general election, then the question really becomes, could Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez win the Democratic nomination for president? After running through this scenario, I think the clear answer to that, in theory, is clearly yes. So shouldn't these Democratic voters, unsure if she can win in the fall, get behind her? The irony is these very voters might end up being the ones backing either Newsom or Ossoff in this scenario to prevent AOC, precisely because they don't think she could win. It's a weird paradox. Looking back at 2008, if George Bush was leaving office with more goodwill, I think John McCain would have had a much better shot of becoming president that year. And I think that would have given Democratic Party voters more pause when considering voting for Barack Hussein Obama that year. I'm not saying AOC is a shoo-in to the presidency next time around, but you have to admit she does have that X factor we only see in a few politicians. Think Bill Clinton, Obama, Trump even. Do any of the other candidates in this race have that? Maybe.
Eat that bread.
Maybe not. We'll see. But I think it's pretty clear she does. As I get older and live through more and more elections, it's made clear to me just how much better of an environment 2028 is for a progressive Democrat to run for president than in other years. And the question now is whether AOC thinks she could be the next president of the United States.
Go.
I guess we'll just have to see.
All right, let's go cut that chain, Mr. Squirrel.
Wow, look at this. 79% in an average of polls. That is the highest disapproval.
New video. Let me take a little break. Sniff. Hee hee. I know that smell. You managed to make some nice bread, didn't you, sweetie? That's creepy. Sure did. Oh, so after leafage, you've now powered up cut? Wait a moment. I suppose that means... Do you think you might be able to use cut on the chain supporting this barrel now?
Oh, that's right. I'm sure you can do it, Pumpkin. Give it a good slice.
Alright, let's go ahead. Cut this shit off. Come on. Let's go. Yeah, boy. Yeah, boy. Look at all that smoke. My goodness. Oh, it's so cute. Look at that thing. Eat that berry. Whew! What a relief to be out there. Ooh, are you Sweeties the one who saved me? What's with the reaction? Surprised to see such a charming Pokemon pop out of that barrel. Yes, I am. Greedy Pokemon. Greedent. Oh, she's greedy, huh? Growing up with a family of foodies, this Pokemon learned to love cooking. It will happily eat pretty much anything. So it tends to season food rather carelessly. Ugh, I want to eat this. You're a Pokemon? You said you were the best chef in town, so naturally I thought you were human. Well, I am the best in town. After all, there's no one else left here. And I'd appreciate it if you called me Chef Dante. Chef Dante. Besides, no human could chat so eloquently with Pokemon. Surely you know that, Professor Tangsworth. That says maybe, but... fiddlesticks. I was so sure, but I suppose I jumped to conclusions. In any case, you two have saved me. Isn't that wonderful? Thank you so much, sweeties. Alright, Jeff Dante. I ain't your sweetie. What are we doing now? What are we doing here? By the way, are you also searching for the humans? Yes, we are. Oh, indeed we are. I take it you are. Oh, messing up my words here. Ew, indeed we are. I take it you are as well. Yes, I am looking for my buddy. Your buddy? Do you mean your trainer? No, it was chef at the restaurant. Truth is, my buddy was best chef in town. Oh, so that's why you know so much about cooking. Do you remember anything else about the humans? What was your buddy like before they disappeared? All I know is that when I woke up a bit ago, the town was in a state that is now. I have no idea what's going on or what happened. But this place was already in decline before, since so many of the humans who worked as coal miners left. Even my buddy's restaurant, which used to always be so full of customers, was seeing less business. I knew they were worrying about that. Oh, but that wouldn't be enough to make your buddy just up and leave you behind, would it? They don't sound like that kind of person to me. Of course it wouldn't. When I woke up, it wasn't just my buddy who was gone. Every single human had disappeared. All of them. As for the town itself, just look at the state of it. Gone completely to ruin. I'm sure something very disastrous must have happened. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but humans have disappeared from other towns as well. And for a very long time now, I've been pondering what we can do to get them to come back. Oh, I've just had the most wonderful idea, man, I tell you. Diddle beep. Message from your Pokedex. You've earned a recipe. Oh, shoot. Alright. Wooden posts. Cool. Alright, let's play this video. DNC Southern Surge, Trump all-time gas flops, and more. Alright, let's go, Harry Enton. What we got?
For any president on record. Joe Biden wasn't liked on gas prices, but he only reached 72%. Barack Obama wasn't well liked back in 2011, but he only reached 68%. Even George W. Bush back in 2006, he reached 75%. I remember the gas prices being quite high back then, but he only reached 75%. Donald Trump takes the cake as these $4 plus gas prices continue to give us pain at the pump. The American people are taking their anger out on the President of the United States.
So that's the broad number.
They should.
What about when you break this down by party?
Yeah, what happens when you break it down by party? Well, you don't get to 79% just by Democrats saying you're President Trump. You get to it by the fact that we see it across the board. Look at this. Yeah, wow again. 96% of Democrats, 85% of independents, and even a majority of Republicans, 52%, that loyal Republican base who has been through thick and thin with Donald John Trump, even they have turned against the President of the United States on gas prices. You get the rare trifecta, and in the case of President Trump, a very painful trifecta indeed.
So let's break this down, if we could, then by voters, and I'm thinking specifically working class voters. This is a group that really broke well for President Trump. How is his approval with them right now?
Yeah, I think a lot of them are having some regrets, at least when it comes to gas prices, right? President Trump, historically strong for a Republican president, Republican candidate, among the working class, among those making less than $50,000. But look at these numbers. Disapprove of Trump on gas prices. Oh, look at this. 86%. 86%.
Whoa.
I mean, what is that? We're talking about more than 6 and 7. I don't even know when we get the fractions that high. My goodness gracious. Among Republicans, we're talking, look at this. We're talking 2 in 3 Republicans, 2 in 3 Republicans. Independents, 90%. Democrats, 93%.
Beans in a
I
frying
mean, you just
pan.
don't ever see numbers like these. These are just atrocious numbers among the working class. A trifecta indeed, and a very clear trifecta of the working class turning against President Trump, regardless of party identification. Their map to take back a majority runs through the South. What are we talking about? Why don't we talk about Georgia? Look at this. Jon Ossoff up by 13 points. How about Roy Cooper, the former governor, up 9 points? And then James Tallarico holding on to that lead in the great state of Texas down there in the South, 2 points. So 3 southern states, 3 former Confederate states, and you see that Democrats are leading in them all. There has not been a Senate Democratic win in North Carolina since 2008. And in Texas, you have to go all the way back since 1988. So it could, in fact, be a historic year for Democrats in these 3 southern states.
You just gave us some sense of how unusual it is for those 2 states. But what would it look like if all 3 of the Democrats were to win in those 3 states? How unusual is that?
Yeah, how unusual it is. They're ahead in these 3. They're also heavily favored in the great state of Virginia. So in the 2000s midterm Senate races, we're looking at something historic potentially here, Sarah Seidman. They're up right now in 4 states. The most Dem wins in a year in the former Confederacy in a midterm in the 2000s. This century is only 2. They could potentially win double the amount of races than they have in any midterm cycle this entire century in the southern United States when you add together Georgia, North Carolina, Texas, and the great Commonwealth of Virginia.
All right, so who is it? What group is it, or is there just one group that's helping to push Democrats into this unusual position in those states?
Yeah, what it is it's white college voters. We have seen that group move from the Republican column, shifting towards the Democratic column. And just look at these numbers here. Margin among white college voters. In 2016, when Trump won his first term, look at this. In the presidential race, it was 19 points in North Carolina. Look at where the polling is now.
Damn,
you have Roy Cooper up by 13 points. Dude. That's a 30-point shift. How about in Texas? Trump won it by 31. Now it's just a 1-point lead.
30
in Georgia, it was 41 points.
Bro.
Now, what are we talking about? We're seeing that Jon Ossoff's only down by 13. We're talking about a 31-point shift on average among white college voters. They are driving this. And when you put it all together, Sarah Steiner, and we look at the entire map, and we look at the Kalshi prediction market, look at this. Chance to win the United States Senate in 2026. The odds are moving in the Democrats' direction. Republicans were a 56% chance a month ago. Now it's basically dead even, 51% chance to 49% chance. So Democrats very much in the game because of these southern races. And as I said at the beginning of this, the prediction markets also predict a 100% chance that, in fact, you will be calling me after this show.
How do voters feel about the president's work on jobs?
You know, these are the types of numbers that will make a lot of Republican members of Congress lose their jobs come November. You can see it right here. I mean, just look at this trend line. Trump's net approval rating on jobs. He is now 22 points underwater, swimming with the fishes, a very unlucky 22 points. That is way down from where he was at the beginning of term number 2, where he was at plus 9 points. And the whole other thing is this was such a big strength for President Trump in term number 1. He was 10 points above water at this point in term number 1. So we're talking about a 32-point decline in terms of Trump's net approval rating on jobs. It is not just inflation that is hurting Trump when it comes to the economy and the Americans' voters' minds. It is jobs as well.
This is just a huge swing.
This is a
huge swing on a foundational issue
Yes.
that he ran on. How do people feel in general about the jobs market right now?
Great question, Johnny B. And I think that this really gives the game away. I mean, just look at this. On jobs and employment, we're on the wrong track, the right track. Back at the beginning of Trump's second term, the plurality set on the right track. That ain't the case no more, I'll tell you this much. Look at that. That right track number has fallen significantly, down 11 points now to 29%. And that wrong track number, which was behind that right track, is now running ahead of it. Look at that number, up nearly 20 points now. The majority of Americans say that the country is on the wrong track when it comes to jobs and employment. No wonder President Trump's numbers are so poor at this point.
And again, this gets to how people feel.
Yes.
You can't tell people how they feel. This is a matter of feelings and sentiment.
This is feelings and sentiment, and you know what? That's the name of the game in politics.
How do people feel about getting a job in general?
Yeah, I think what is driving this? What is driving this right track, this wrong track number to rocket on up? Well, I'll tell you what's causing it to rocket on up. Look at this. Okay, good or bad time to find a quality.
Hold on. You can't tell people how to feel because Republicans did it about trans people. They did it about immigrants. They did it about these topics that are very, like, not in your life, day-to-day things. Like, how often is day-to-day immigration affecting you? Or how often are trans people in your area? Like, never, ever, 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 ever. But somehow the Republicans have convinced them to feel scared about them. And honestly, I think with those two things, they were able to get enough Americans to vote for Donald Trump. On the other hand, when it's things that are day-to-day, everyday expenses that people like have to account for, like money doesn't lie. People know how much money is in their bank account. You can't lie to them about that. They're not dumb. People aren't dumb. Okay, they can just be easily misled when there is little substance to the claims you're making in their life. So that's all I'm gonna say. That triggered me a little bit.
You go back just before the beginning of Trump's second term in office, the plurality, 48% said a good time. Now you had 45% saying a bad time, just running slightly behind that good time. But look at this, that bad number, again, up like a rocket. We're talking about 63% at the beginning of Q2 in 2026. And that good number, way down into the basement, now just 33%. It's a 30-point advantage and a bad advantage when it comes to finding a quality job.
And again, you're dealing with sentiment here, how people feel, which is harder to get them to change.
Correct.
What are the prediction markets then saying about whether or not there'll be, more big layoffs in some sectors like the tech sector?
Yeah, I mean, just take a look at this. This is what it is. Chance 2026 tech layoffs exceed 2025. 92% chance according to the Kalshi prediction market. These are the types of numbers that political nightmares are made of, and it is very difficult to change voter sentiment when it seems to be so locked in this. On the negative side, you put that together with voter sentiment on inflation, that is a recipe for disaster for Republicans running in the midterm elections.
And they're running out of time. Harry, and thank you very much for that.
Thank you, my friend. Abdullah Syed is in trouble in Michigan. Take a look here. Michigan Senate, Rogers versus Elside. Look at this, a new Fox News poll. Rogers is actually up by 4 points. He's up by 4 points. It's close, but a Republican Republican is ahead in Michigan. And why? Why? What is going on? Look among independents. Rogers actually leads by 5. This is extremely unusual because across the political map, as I was looking at these different Fox News posts, I couldn't find another example where the Republican was actually leading among independents. And it turns out that candidate quality may in fact matter, at least in terms of how voters see it, because in this same poll, the Democratic candidate for governor was ahead. So this is unique to the Senate race, and it is quite a troubling result for Democrats and quite a heartening one for Republicans.
So do you have a sense then, Harry, of what it is
Abdul
that is contributing
loses,
to
I'm gonna be so mad
the struggles, right, that Abdul al-Sayed is it that Rogers is a stronger candidate, or is it that al-Sayed has more issues for voters to
baggage,
deal with?
man.
It is all about Abdul al-Sayed. He is a weak candidate, at least by the metrics that we normally look at. And you can just take a look here. Okay, the net favorability rating of the Dem Senate candidates across these northern battlegrounds.
Weak candidate. Oh, yeah, he uses Israel bootlegger, aren't you? APAC.
Than his favorable rating, and it is significantly higher.
Relax,
look how far underwater Abdul al-Sayed is. He is 13 points underwater under there Lake Michigan. My goodness gracious. Troy Jackson in Maine, he's at +1. You got Sherrod Brown at +4 in Ohio, and Josh Turek in Iowa way above there at +18 points. This is extremely unusual. Again, across the map, Democrats have done such a good job recruiting candidates who are well liked by the voters. Again, I looked at all the Fox News polls. All the Democrats were above water except for Abdul al-Sayed, and he is 13 points underwater. This is all about Abdul al-Sayed being a weak candidate, at least in the minds of the voters.
And so then just putting that in perspective.
Oh my gosh, the candidate that the DSA is losing their mind over, right? Just like idolizing because they think he's such a wonderful, magnificent candidate. Turns out is not as popular as they think that he is. Oh my God. He barely squeaked out a victory against APAC Haley Stevens, who, you know, I understand why people feel the way they do about APAC, but it is such a stupid metric as to gauge whether a politician is good or bad. You know, super PAC spending is something a lot of candidates cannot control. Super PACs spend against candidates all the time and for candidates all the time, and no one can tell them how to spend their money, not even the candidates that they're campaigning for, because of the way super PACs work. It is against the law for a candidate to talk to a super PAC and coordinate how that money is spent, because then it becomes illegal. The legal part is they can silently spend in advocacy for their preferred candidate, and they can spend endlessly without a limit. That's the problem, okay? Okay, now I'm getting on a rant. When people say this person's taking money from APAC, the actual APAC is just a regular PAC and can only give up to $10,000 a year. $5,000 in the primary, $5,000 in the general. When people say APAC, they mean United Democracy Project, which gives people no money and just spends on advertisement for the candidates that they like, and they also spend money on advertisement for candidates they don't like as well. They'll make negative ads against them, not necessarily in favor of Haley Stevens. So all I'm saying is, you know, sure, Israel is a problem, specifically Netanyahu, with the wars that he's waging and the way that he carries himself in the Middle East. It's pretty bad. How he treats people, genocide in Gaza, that's pretty bad. All that stuff should be sorted out, figured out. But to think, okay, all right, I'm just gonna stop talking about it. No one cares. No one cares. No one cares about anything. They just want to feel a certain way. I'm done.
Too, in the state of Michigan, this is, I mean, you touched on this, right? But this is especially important when you look at things in the state of Michigan.
Yeah, okay. So you look at this first slide, right? You see that Mike Rogers is ahead, right, by 4 points. Well, I was interested because I couldn't think of another example where you actually had a Democratic candidate who was down at least 4 points. 4 points in a Senate poll in Michigan, and it turns out for this entire century, Abdul al-Sayed is the only one in a poll that meets CNN standards for publication. This is extremely, extremely, extremely unusual. Abdul al-Sayed breaking records in the ways that you don't want to. In fact, he is the first Democrat down by this much, as I said, in a century since 1994.
I like the picture they used.
Note, obviously, we have a campaign to go, and I think there are different ways you can look at this metric, right, this race. And I will say it's a snapshot in time. Michigan Senate chances, according to the Calendar prediction market. Look, Abdul al-Sayed's chances of fallen, but he still has a better chance than not of winning this race. But again, this is a real potential lifeline for Republicans who want to maintain control of the United States Senate. Simply put, Michigan being in play, a big deal and extremely unusual. Abdullah said.
If Abdul al-Sayed wants to win, he has to denounce Hassan Piker, because the dude has said some pretty horrible things and supports actual terrorism against the Israeli people. He finds Hamas, he thinks Hamas are superheroes. I'm not just saying it because he calls out AIPAC, okay? That's not why I'm saying he supports Hamas. It's because he actually supports Hamas. Anyways, if he wants to win over the Haley Stevens voters, he's going to have to denounce Hassan Piker, because I would think that people who are in Michigan that are pro-Israel don't necessarily want someone who buddies up with people who advocate for terrorism against other people. I don't think people like that very much. That's pretty extreme and scary. So why would they vote for someone like that? I'm just saying. His odds in polls might improve if he just does that. I swear. I feel like all that would change.
Making it so with his historic unpopularity in the great state of Michigan. I think this could very well be a historic year for black gubernatorial candidates, and it starts off in the South. Just take a look here. Okay. Hello. Okay. Gov races, general election polls. Byron Donalds, who's a heavy favorite to be the Republican nominee in Florida, he's up by 5 points over his likely Democratic opponent. You come to Georgia, Keisha Lance Bottoms, get this, she's up by 5 points. So it's happening across the aisle at this point. You got a Republican in Florida, a Democrat in the great state of Georgia, the Peach State, both at this point leading in the polls, favored to be the next governors of two former Confederate states. That would be historic, making neither state has ever had a black governor before.
So that would be key. There are also other races you're keeping an eye on that are perhaps not as well known, if you will, across the country, and there's not as much polling in these races, but you're seeing some movement there.
Yeah, you mentioned Wisconsin, you mentioned David Crowley. I mean, just look at these. Okay, how about two other states? Current Gov race forecast ratings. In Wisconsin, Crowley is the favorite. That race is definitely leaning Dem at this point. Wisconsin has never had a black governor. Then in the great state of Maryland, Wes Moore is running for re-election. He is a very heavy favorite to win there. So you're seeing it. You're seeing in the South. You're seeing in the border states like Maryland, and you're seeing in the Midwest as well. You're talking about 4 candidates who at this point look more likely than not to be the next governors of their state. In the case of Wes Moore, win re-election. You're seeing it across the political map.
Seeing it across, this is, you mentioned some of the potential history that could be made, but writ large, this would be quite a year.
Yeah, this would be quite a year. So you add up Wes Moore, you add up Crowley, you add up Byron Donalds, you add up Keisha Lance Bottoms. Just look at this. This really says it. Elected black governors. In the former column, there's only 2. There's 1, there's 2, right? You have one from Virginia, you have one from Massachusetts and Deval Patrick, right? And then in 2026, there are 4. You are literally getting double the number of former elected black governors who could be elected this year. And then there are 2 more in Nevada and Michigan who are underdogs but have a legitimate shot of winning. So what we're talking about is, we're always talking about getting more diversity in our political system, allowing African Americans to be a full part of this country. And now in the gubernatorial column, we might actually start trying to reach towards that goal. So you got Aaron Ford, you got John James, who are the 2 underdogs. And in the favorites here, again, you have Keisha Lance Bottoms, you have David Crowley, you have Wes Moore, and you have Byron Donalds. So it's just something that is happening across the political map, a year in which we could finally see history actually being made. Can we catch a break here? Look at this. Polls over state lefties in Dem primaries. Last week it was 10 points. You think 10 points is a lot? How about 20 points in Wisconsin? Now, I will note that in this case, Wisconsin had some candidate switches, candidates coming out, candidates leaving the race. I was suspect after what happened in Michigan that the polling that showed Francesca Hong up by about 20 points was actually going to come to fruition. But it did happen again. The polls overstated the lefties in Wisconsin, just like they did in another Great Lake battleground state of Michigan.
Okay.
Yeah, and he.
What are some of the possible reasons why these polls are ultimately overstating the support that they get on Election Day?
Yeah, if this were just about, the fact that the polls overestimate the two lefties, that would be one thing. But I think that this may speak to something bigger, which is the polling may be having too many of those young progressives. And what am I talking about? Well, just take a look here. Who won the 5 counties with the most under the age of 40, that is 18 to 39? In the Michigan Senate, it was Abdul Assayed. He won 05. How about in Wisconsin governor? The exact same thing. In the youngest counties, that is where these lefties did the best. And so when you kind of look at the polling, you go, hey, wait a minute, maybe these polls had too many younger folks in them. And I think that speaks to something larger potentially, which is all these pollings, which is showing progressivism on the left, the far left rising, seeing democratic socialism, especially in the case of Wisconsin, rising. You got to look at these results and say, hey, wait a minute, maybe, Johnny, maybe these polls are overestimating how much that democratic socialism is rising within the Democratic Party, because in 2 key statewide races in a row, what we've seen is the lefties being vastly overestimated, and in the case of Wisconsin, the Democratic Socialists being vastly overestimated by 20 points.
If you oversample among young people, one of the things that can happen is young people don't vote as much.
Yes.
And then you can skew the ultimate results there.
Correct. And I think that means so much as we're looking at these polls and what the actual implications are in terms of how big the left rise is.
And the other thing that may have happened in Wisconsin, especially in Wisconsin, is that people who hadn't decided may have decided late, or they may have changed their minds because of a lot of the things that people were talking about just in the last few weeks with Francesca Hong may not have helped her, like, say, her past positions not digging Thanksgiving.
Yeah, folks, if you're going to run for political office in this country, dare I say you should be pro-Thanksgiving from the beginning of the campaign to the end of the campaign. Enough of the anti-Thanksgiving stuff. And why do I say that? Because just look at this. Americans who think or say that they don't celebrate Thanksgiving, it's just 8%. It's just 8%. To put that into some perspective for you, 10% of Americans say the earth is flat, and 12% of Americans say the moon landing was fake. Don't pick a position or be able to be implied that you picked a position in which less people believe in it than say the moon landing was fake or the earth was flat, Johnny.
And I will note that was the predominant story about her in the news the last few weeks. Wow. It was hot. So is that going to drive decisions from voters?
I was schwitzing a lot in the month of July, although granted, I schwitz a lot all the time. But the bottom line when it comes to voters is, simply put, they don't care. They don't care. I mean, just look at these numbers. Okay, top issue, a midterm vote. You can list up the 3 issues. The economy, not surprisingly, comes in at number 1 at 54%. Immigration, 28%. Look where climate change is. It's tied for 14th. Tied for 14th, all the way down here at 3%. Johnny, I'm not the greatest mathematician in the world, but I sure as heck know that 54% is a whole heck of a lot higher than 3%. So despite the climate being so warm in the month of July, the hottest month on record here in the United States of America, the voters simply put do not say that climate change is going to be an issue in which they vote upon in the midterm election.
And how much people are concerned has been changing over time.
Yeah, I mean, this is, I think, the other thing, which is, how much concern is there when it comes over time? And you see this 3% here, and you can see these slides right here. Say climate change is a very big problem. In 2016, it was 40%. It was 40%. Look where we are in 2026. It's 39%. It's 39%. Now, Johnny B., you're talking about change. Where the change we have seen is partisanship, right? And what we can see is Republicans, more so than anybody else, have been shifting away from the idea that climate change is a top issue for them. Take a look at this. The least important issue for Republicans, it's just 14% in terms of saying that climate change is a very big problem. So we're seeing a large partisan split, but when it comes together, Democrats are going in one direction, Republicans are going in another direction. But when you put those two together, the bottom line is we're only talking about 2 in 5 Americans, both now and 10 years ago, saying that climate change is a very big problem.
This is an all New York accent hit, I'm noticing this time. You're leaning into that.
I'm leaning into it.
Because it was hot in July in New York.
Yes.
So to what extent do people blame human activity for this?
So you see this 40%, you see this 39%. Now I really am leaning into the New York accent. Say it's humans causing the earth to warm. Look at this. In 2016, it was 45%. Now it's 48%. Again, no real shift that's going on here, as opposed to saying there's no warming or it's natural.
Now, I really like Mr. B, but in this particular video, he made a bunch of arguments where I think the research literature and political science gives you a different perspective.
Let's see what's going on, Mr. B.
Dare you?
How dare you, Pop?
Tell him, Mr. B.
I'm Mr. Beats, and you may be aware that I'm trying to raise awareness about expanding the size of the U.S. House of Representatives.
Yes, Matt, we are all aware. You won't stop talking about it. I really do think that these Uncap the House videos are starting to hurt your channel.
You're probably right, but I don't care.
And Matt, why are you wearing a banana costume? At least your hair isn't wet.
Anyway, so uncapping the House is the single most important reform right now, in my opinion. So who does this fella think he is critiquing it, huh?
Yeah, who does he think he is?
Well, as it turns out, Power Politics is an excellent channel, and the dude who runs it, Christian Fong, a political science professor at Johns Hopkins University, clearly knows what he's talking about. I'm finally being challenged. Finally being challenged. A guy who has a doctorate, I believe, in political science. So understands political science much better than myself. But I do think his video reacting to me promoting uncapping the House simply didn't convince me that uncapping the House is a bad idea. No cap. So in this video, I'm going to react to his reaction, and I hope that you react to my reaction to his reaction. And then I also hope that someone reacts to you reacting to my reaction to his reaction.
Right now. Holy schmoly.
We can do this all day. So let's hear him out. Let's see what he has to say that's critical of uncapping the House.
Uncapping the House is one of the most popular reform proposals on the internet. There are tons of articles and videos that make all kinds of interesting arguments for why this would be a good thing.
Are there really? Like, I'm a little surprised that he would say that. I don't think this is very popular at all.
I don't hear that at all.
Whenever I bring it up in real life,
what are you talking about,
sure,
bro?
no one's heard of it. But maybe on the internet, yeah, maybe for us who don't touch grass that much. But I guess that's kind of flattering that he says this is becoming popular. That's cool, though.
There's no way it's popular. People don't even know that the house was frozen. I just learned this, whenever Mr. Beat started talking about it. They froze the house like in the 20s or something.
Fella are aware of it.
So let's go ahead and dive right into his analysis of the problem.
So when districts get too large, access declines. And when access declines, accountability weakens.
Typically, we don't think of access as an important ingredient for accountability. Talking to politicians is usually not a great way to learn about their record because they're trying to get reelected. They're gonna tell you whatever it is they think you wanna hear. Instead, when we think about accountability, we're typically focused on the media. And there's some interesting research that suggests that uncapping the House might actually make it harder for the media to do that job. So imagine you live in Redding, California, and your local TV news station is KRCR. And if you watch KRCR, you almost certainly live—
Did I just see mermaids? I'm sorry, I was not expecting the mermaids.
In California's first congressional district, which means that your representative is James Gallagher.
It's a large district, by the way.
So if you're a producer at KRCR and you're thinking about running a story on James Gallagher, you can be confident that that's going to be relevant to basically everyone watching. Okay, now imagine that you live in my hometown, Sacramento, California. In Sacramento, the local TV news station is KCRA. Your congressman might be Kevin Kiley, or Tom McClintock, or Doris Matsui, or Ami Bera, or Josh Harder, or maybe even Adam Gray. So whose voters do you think are gonna be better informed about what their congressman is doing? James Gallagher's or Doris Matsui's? Well, obviously James Gallagher's, because he gets basically his own private TV station.
I do have a lot to say about this, but for starters, like, why just assume people are watching the local news? My father-in-law watches the local news. My father-in-law is about 65 years old.
Them right now. They don't even know what the hell's going on. So it's a stupid argument.
I think we are assuming old media habits here. People just don't watch TV anymore. But I'll go more into this. Here's a study he's going to bring up.
Research that supports this is a paper by Jim Snyder and David Stromberg. What they show is that as you jam more congressmen into a given media market, the amount of coverage that newspapers in that media market devote to each of those congressmen decreases. And then the really interesting part is that they show that this undermines accountability. Congressmen in crowded media markets do not work as hard and are more likely to vote the party line than congressmen in less crowded media markets.
So you're saying, this is one of those counterintuitive arguments of like, In fact, actually, if you increase the representation, you actually dilute the power of that representative, and they'll just vote across the party line. So instead of increasing representation, you're actually just diluting your power. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, media is a big reason why we're so disconnected from our members of Congress and why we're so polarized. Again, though, I can't get over, like, people just don't watch local television anymore. They don't. Ratings have been declining for years. We don't get our news from traditional news anymore. When was this study? I think it's from, like, let me double check when this study was from. Yeah, 2010. So it's about 16 years old.
I do.
It's
but I get my stuff on YouTube.
We have moved over the last 50, 60 years from a media ecosphere in which we get large amounts of news from local newspapers and local TV stations to a media diet in which we get almost all of our news from big national cable news channels and from the internet. And you can think of this transition.
Most of us actually get our political news from influencers, folks like myself. I mean, you're all watching me, you're not watching CNN. Often we're watching people react to CNN, but even then, like, who are they trusting more, the influencer or CNN? Often CNN is the least trusted. I think influencers have more clout these days. There's a reason why the Democratic Party is focusing so much on propping up a lot of these influencers, because they know they have a lot more. I mean, that's how Trump was able to get so much support in 2024. I actually am in touch with other YouTubers, Instagram, TikTok. They exclusively cover local politics. This kind of job did not exist 10 years ago, you know? I mean, I've been doing that a lot lately. I've been attending campaign events. I've been in that world. There's a reason why I got to interview Gavin Newsom and Mark Kelly, because they understand this is how the world is now. Influencers have more clout.
Let's get to Mr. Beat's next argument.
And when access declines, accountability weakens, which shifts power away from us, the people, right, and toward leadership structures, bureaucracies, and the executive branch.
I am very excited to talk about congressional party leaders because that's actually what I wrote one of the chapters of my dissertation about. So if you look to the history of the House of Representatives, and the Senate will tell you the exact same story. If we expanded the House, it sure seems that that would tend to increase the power of party leaders over the rest of the chamber.
I just don't see it. So what he's saying basically is that a larger House forces power to concentrate to top leadership, like the Speaker of the House, and committee chairs, in order for anything to get done, and in order for there to be stability. And so I think if you do look at history, and actually, if you look at states across the country who have larger legislatures make strict party discipline harder to enforce, not easier. So if anything, party leadership is undermined. Yeah, would it be chaotic? I would concede that. That is a concern. But then again, I don't know if that's necessarily true either, because like there's going to be more pressure from constituents instead of special interests. So if you have more pressure from constituents, I mean, the mob is at your door, then I feel like there's more pressure to actually get popular things done, as opposed to if you're just only getting pressure from special interest corporations, then it's like, okay, well, you know, you're mainly just obstructing progress. If I'm going to concede this argument that yes, a larger House forces power to concentrate in top leadership, if that is a concern, you can still pair this with other reforms in the House.
As for the balance of power between Congress and the president, every time the president makes a power grab, the only way for Congress to reverse it is to pass a law. But the president can veto that law. And in order to override the president's veto, you need a 2/3 majority in each chamber.
Yeah.
That means you're gonna, as a practical matter, have to get some members of the president's party on board with undermining the president.
Not just any law, though. They can pass a law withholding money. That's a pretty big deal. Also, they can impeach. I mean, just because they don't have the courage to do that doesn't mean that it's not a big power. I mean, they can literally remove a president from office. Just because they haven't done it doesn't mean it's not something that's impressive.
Now, there is an offsetting benefit, which is that if you reverse a presidential power grab, that makes Congress more powerful. And you're a member of Congress, so that makes you more powerful too.
Yeah.
But the problem is that in the House of Representatives, there are 434 other congressmen. So you only have a 1/435th share of that power.
It's the people's house. Like, stop thinking about this in terms of like you have the power. No, it's the people's power, dude.
Yeah.
The House of Representatives is the people's house.
Now let's talk about polarization.
Polarization intensifies with scale. When districts become very large, elections reward confrontation over cooperation and emotion over reason.
The most relevant stuff is from Joey Chen and Jonathan
Make it
Liu.
200. Like,
and what they show
every
is
state
that a
is
big
two
part of the reason why we
5%.
get really lopsided districts,
want?
where it's like 4 Republicans for every Democrat, or 10 Democrats for every Republican, is not because of partisan gerrymandering.
Oh no.
But because Republicans tend to live near other Republicans. Democrats tend to live near other Democrats. And simply in the process of trying to draw compact
I just don't like that argument. Democrats tend to live next to other Democrats. Republicans tend to live next to other Republicans. Well, who gets to pick where they get to live first? I mean, nah, man, the fact is that people choose where they live mostly based on their ability to make money there. Economic reasons are by far the main driver determining where someone lives. It is gerrymandering, because if you look at how the districts are drawn, often they take a little sliver of an urban area and then they reach it out into the far depths of rural America to make it either more competitive or red in these red states. And then with these blue states, like what happened in Illinois infamously, you have a very large urban area that dominates the state, Chicago, and then they are just stripping them out into rural areas to weaken rural areas in Illinois. Smaller districts incentivize pragmatism. I mean, you don't have to worry about whatever the talking points of the national media are. You can ignore that when you are mobilizing toward your base, not towards the national party. We have gridlock right now. We have polarization right now. What are you going to do? Just keep things the same? And it's not going to get any better if we don't do anything.
Yeah, we have
I say we
gridlock.
try it. I say we try it.
Now, there is a sense in which I think that polarization increases with scale, but it's not the scale of the district, it's the scale of the legislature. Personal relationships between legislators are such an important ingredient.
Personally, I agree. Uncapping the House is important, but gerrymandering has to be fixed. We cannot do partisan gerrymandering anymore. I think that's probably one of the biggest reasons we have so much political gridlock. If you're able to uncap the House so that there's more representatives in the House, so that everyone in the United States gets more representation and more access to representation, then one of the first things we should do is ban partisan gerrymandering somehow. I don't know what is a way to do that, because I think you'd probably need a constitutional amendment of some sort that declares that every state has to do independent redistricting. We cannot have politicians picking their voters. It's just crazy, bro. There's just like, if you want to talk about a rigged system, like that's kind of like the most rigged you can get in our political systems. We can pick the districts we want because we know, like, okay, Republicans live here and Democrats live here. Let's break up the Democratic Party and let's make sure that we accumulate the Republican Party here so that we get more votes and we can secure our footholds of power in the federal government this way. And Democrats do it too. It's a two-way game here. I don't like it when either party does it. So fix that, fix gerrymandering, and uncap the House. It has to be paired, because I feel like just fixing one thing won't fix the other. Or that doesn't make sense. Just fixing one won't be enough. It has to be done in tandem. Anyways.
For breaking through gridlock and building bipartisan coalitions. So what does this have to do with uncapping the House? Well, uncapping the House makes the legislature even bigger. So now instead of those 10 people around a conference table representing 3% of the legislature, you represent 1.5 or 1% of the legislature. It makes it even harder to engage in this sort of bottom-up, relationship-based style of legislating that is so essential to breaking through gridlock and reducing partisan polarization.
That clip is many, many years old. You just don't see that as much as you used to either, like that camaraderie between Democrats and Republicans in the Senate. Camaraderie with your colleagues in the House is less important. You should have more camaraderie with your constituents.
Yeah.
Right now, we have
You're out
so
there to
many
make
members of the
friends.
House
You're
of
there to
Representatives
pass laws,
who are
make
so
laws.
out of touch with their constituents. They don't hold town
No,
halls. They
freaking
don't
kidding,
respond to
dude.
letters. They don't respond to phone calls. They have a staff that doesn't even do that anymore because they're swamped. They're underpaid. Now the Senate, I get it. Camaraderie is more important. They're supposed to represent the entire state. It's a different dynamic there.
And
There's
it's designed to
fewer
be
of them.
smaller
So
than
I
the
just think
House, so
bringing
that's
up
fine.
comparing the
fine.
Senate and the House here is
It doesn't make sense. Yes.
not that compelling to me. Thank you, Power Politics,
Yeah,
for
the
making
Senate-
this video. The guy clearly knows his stuff.
Sorta. I don't know. I feel like he's trying to turn the House into the Senate. The Senate is supposed to be anti-majoritarian. It's supposed to restrict the House because they know that the House could get crazy. Our founders, when they were doing this, they knew that if they just had a single House, just like the House of Representatives right now, or a single chamber, they knew that the majority of radicals could take hold of power and vote away the rights of the others. So they, posted in, they added in the Senate, the second chamber, to take a look at the laws that they're passing and be like, okay, you're voting away the rights of these people. We're not passing this bill. I'm sorry. I don't know. That's a bad video. Bad video, in my opinion.
And he's trying to be as nonpartisan as possible. And even at the end there, he's just like, I'm not here to make value judgments. You decide for yourself. I think the most compelling argument that he said, I think it was the second argument, a larger House forces power to concentrate in top leadership.
Maybe.
I can kind of see what he's saying there. I don't know. We can
don't.
also pass other reforms. And that's the main thing I want to say. Like, this is not meant to be the only reform we pass. Hopefully it's one of many, and it will lead to many others. That's why I call it a first reform.
So that's it. I'm glad Christian made this video. I'm glad he was critical of uncapping the House, and I hope that people continue to critically think about this issue of uncapping the U.S. House of Representatives. Again, it's not a perfect reform. No.
The more I think about it, the more I hate that video he made. It's bad. It was just a bad video. Mr. Beat's right. Mr. Beat, I have been thinking about uncapping the House, and I believe strongly that it has to be paired with a ban on gerrymandering. This would make This would make representation even more representative. I don't buy this gridlock argument. Both houses, as they are, strictly vote along party lines already, and power is already accumulated in the top leadership positions. Using his argument, using his logic, you should neither decrease or increase the size of the house, since it would only lead it's in my humble, non-PhD having opinion that his critique
reform is, and we must continue to scrutinize any new proposals to change, especially the structure of government itself. But what do you think? What do you think about Christian's arguments? Let me know by sending me a telegraph. If you are still a fan of uncapping the House, please check out projectnocap.com, where you can join a local chapter. There's a Discord server. There's a petition you can sign. So we've got a growing movement going on right now, for real. So check it all out, and thank you for staying curious.
Mr. Beat, I have been thinking about uncapping the House, and I believe strongly that it has to be paired with a ban on gerrymandering. This would make representation even more representative. I don't buy this gridlock argument. Both houses, as they are, strictly vote along party lines already, and power is already accumulated in the top leadership positions. Using his logic, you should neither decrease nor increase the size of the House, so it would only lead to concentrations of power. It's in my humble, non-PhD having opinion that his criticism is bad, because his arguments are also very, very bad. Thanks for teaching me about history and politics, Mr. B. Love your videos. Okay. Mr. Beat, I have been thinking about uncapping the House, and I believe strongly that it has to be paired with a ban on gerrymandering. This would make representation even more representative. I don't buy this gridlock argument. Both houses, as they are, strictly vote along party lines already, and power is already accumulated in the top leadership positions. Using his logic, you should neither decrease nor increase the size of the House, as it would only lead to concentrations of power. It's in my humble, non-PhD having opinion that his criticism is bad, because his arguments are also very bad. Thanks for teaching me about history and politics, Mr. Beat. Love your videos. Do love his videos. All right. How are we? What's next? Let's see what's going on with Ken Paxton.
Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Saturday, August 15th, 2026, and today we are going to be talking about the state of Texas and Ken Paxton's campaign as it sets to be in a very interesting position, as new data points show Ken Paxton losing to James Tallarico in the Texas Senate race, begging the question amongst Republicans, is Ken Paxton working hard enough? Now, if you know anything about Texas politics, you might know that Ken Paxton historically has not been the most avid campaigner in the state. He has not been that big of a guy who goes around the state in stumps and does competitive debates and competitive elections, because he's largely been in a very cushiony gig as Texas Attorney General for quite some time. Now, Ken Paxton's corruption and his past history has been on full display since he won re-election in 2022 alongside the same ballot that Governor Greg Abbott outperformed him in the state against Beto O'Rourke, who had gotten within 3 points of the Senate race just 4 years prior. Taking a look at the state of Texas, you know that it's a very conservative state. Donald Trump won it by 14 points, but Ken Paxton is a chronic underperformer. Even in 2018, when Governor Greg Abbott won re-election by roughly 13 points, Ken Paxton won his race by just 3.5%. Despite the races not being high profile and visible, Ken Paxton has largely skated by. Not really that much conversation around any of the attorney general races until Ken Paxton decided to run for Senate. In the race that was largely handed to him on the Republican side by President Donald Trump and his endorsement, Ken Paxton now faces a very significant hurdle this November. A strong Democratic challenger, a strong Democratic environment, and Republicans largely unwilling to help him out in this race. And a big reason for it, I think, as to why you see this game of chicken going on between national Republicans in D.C. and Donald Trump's super PAC in investing in Texas, whereas they're willing to invest $500 million in all of the other states, is that they feel that the Senate Republicans in all of the other states they've mentioned are working hard. They look at people like Mike Rogers. They look at people like Ashley Hinson. They look at people like Dan Sullivan. They look at people like John Huston. They look at people like John Sununu. They look at people all across the board here, Michael Whatley, Mike Collins, who very clearly want to work for their seat. And while many of them likely will be largely unsuccessful, namely in North Carolina and in Georgia and in other states, in Texas, it doesn't really read to Republicans that Ken Paxton is trying hard enough. The first real sign of this was when the money did not immediately flow after John Cornyn lost his primary to Paxton. And that's largely because Paxton didn't really fill up his schedule, didn't really make any ad reservations, and wasn't really doing what needed to be done to galvanize the Republican base. Rather, he just assumed that he all had it set in stone.
Oh, I didn't know the
when he
gravel
did
could
not.
just break through
Voters
that
in
stuff.
Texas want to be motivated. And on the Democratic side, James Tallarico is giving them that. He's traveling all around the state. He's doing a number of different press hits. Ken Paxton won't even agree to a debate. That matters in an election like this, where it is remarkably close for the first time in generations, and Democrats have a real chance at flipping the Senate seat here for the first time in 30 years, and it stands to be one of the most competitive races all across the country. In other states, you will find that candidates like Ashley Hinson and Dan Sullivan, Mike Collins, Michael Whatley are willing to stand for a debate. They're willing to go out there. They're willing to go on the major presses to try to galvanize the base and get support all across their battleground. Ken Paxton doesn't seem that way. Fox News and the host, Jesse Waters, came out publicly and said, "Where's Ken Paxton?" Quote, "I've seen Mitch McConnell more than Paxton, and McConnell's been in the hospital all summer. Get out of your hole, Paxton, and do something." He then follows up by saying that Fox News can't win this race for you. You need to win it yourself. We can only do so much.
Damn, boy.
Now, Paxton's theory of electability and why he was best suited in the state was referencing Donald Trump's 14-point victory in Texas. The president, in his endorsement of Ken Paxton when he spoke to advisors, wasn't concerned about electability in a state that he won overwhelmingly in the last cycle. And this is where I think Republicans have kind of gotten too confident. Yes,
like
Donald Trump's showing in Texas is impressive, but to the degree that it guarantees him victory and Ken Paxton victory across the state is not set in stone. Voters in Texas have whiplash. A lot of them voted for Donald Trump in 16, voted for Beto O'Rourke in 18, evenly split between Biden and Trump in 20, and then came barreling back to Trump in 24. But that means that they're willing to vote for Democrats on the statewide level, that in 2 elections back-to-back, Democrats came within 5 points. And I think that matters, right? Because Texas is a massive state. The fact is that Biden lost Texas by 5.6%. That is remarkable, given that Biden ended up, being as unpopular as he was by the end of the administration, and that Democrats were certainly not targeting Texas at all in 2020, and yet it was a single-digit race on the borderline of a narrow single-digit race. Ken Paxton has to work for this election. He cannot act like this is any other race that he's dealt with, like the Attorney General races, where he'll be carried across the finish line by Greg Abbott's overwhelming performance in the governor's race. Because in 2018, Ken Paxton almost lost. This was not a high-profile race. Democrats did not invest in it the same way they did with Beto O'Rourke. The Democratic candidate doesn't even have a Wikipedia page because he really was just an attorney, not someone who was established in Democratic or any general politics, like Beto O'Rourke, who was a congressman from the state of Texas. Largely speaking, what we found in the state was that Ken Paxton in 2018 saw a massive underperformance. He underperformed again in 2022, and in both of these elections, he refused to debate his
Donald
Democratic
Trump
opponent
just secured
and was
the back
largely
for Hillary,
unwilling
I
to
swear.
speak to the press about any major issues. He knew that he could skate by, he could ride the coattails of Greg Abbott in this state. This time around, that does not seem to be the case. Because unlike the Attorney General's race, the Senate race takes precedence. It usually is the Senate race at the top of the ticket, then the governor's race. This time, it's going to be that way when Attorney General was way down alongside Land Commissioner and Commissioner of Railroads and a lot of the other voters, the votes that voters take in the state of Texas in this year. The Senate race will be front and center. And I think that it is just a general bad look. I think Republicans are right in assuming that Ken Paxton doesn't have what it takes to slam dunk this election. Unlike 2018, the data is showing Democrats have a real opportunity at winning. If you take a look at the same set of polls done in 2018, there was not a single one conducted by any nonpartisan pollster that said that Ted Cruz would lose. None of them gave Beto O'Rourke any moments of hope, and the final Real Clear Politics average had Ted Cruz up by 7, the New York Times and Siena putting him up by 8, Quinnipiac putting him up by 9, CBS putting him up by 6, Emerson putting Cruz up by 5, and the final vote share was 2.6%. These numbers matter. These data points make a difference. And when Ken Paxton isn't working to win over voters because he believes he has it in the bag, this is why Republicans have major concern and why many of them just don't want to fund the race. They don't want to give him money because they know he isn't going to do well with it. When they see that he backs down from debates, he has to go on Fox News and quell concerns and say, well, I'm not debating because I know I'm going to win this race. Look at the guy I'm running against. There's no chance that I lose. Those are the famous last words of every politician that ends up losing a competitive race. The overconfidence that has been exhibited by the president, by Paxton himself, is going to be to his own demise. Voters don't like being taken advantage of. They don't like being taken for granted. And when Ken Paxton won't even show up for them, won't even debate his opponent in this election, sure, a playbook that might have worked when his ballot was 5 or 6 on the state ballot, but now it's number 1. He is the most talked about Republican in the state of Texas, save maybe Greg Abbott and Donald Trump, but they are household names. Ken Paxton is becoming one, and not for good reason. He's letting the Democrats define him. He's allowing these moments and media visibilities across South Texas, across the entire
Don't point
state,
out his weaknesses.
across the
Just
media
listen.
bubble. A very expensive state when Ken Paxton can't even raise the money and he's being significantly outraised in the state. These things matter. His lack of ability to get out there and show face to voters also translates into a lack of ability to hold major fundraisers. That translates into a lack of ability to spend major donor dollars. That translates to a lack of ability of winning over mass swaths of the electorate. Donald Trump faced no issue in 2024 in fundraising, and neither did Ted Cruz in 2018. Ted Cruz's advantage was largely built because Ted Cruz adopted a very scorched earth strategy against Beto O'Rourke in defining him early. He went negative on the airwaves against Beto O'Rourke. Beto O'Rourke didn't go negative on Ted Cruz until 2 weeks before the election. Sounds crazy, but is 100% true. And allowed Ted Cruz to use that $80 million that he raised effectively in 2018, which today would be $100+ million, adjusting for cost of inflation. And so, broadly, there's a lot of red flags here with Ken Paxton. He's more popular than Ted Cruz. He's more corrupt than Ted Cruz. And voters clearly don't gravitate towards that, and he's giving them no reason to. Ken Paxton is not working the hardest at winning this race. He's barely up in the press. He's not doing any of these major games that you have to play when you play the game of politics, like debates, like town halls, like all of these different things that are necessary to get your voice out there, get your message out there, and compete actively in an election. This is what happens when you throw someone into the deep end who has never really faced a real competitive election. 2018 was because he was so bad of a candidate, not because he had a competitive race. He didn't sweat any of these elections, but it showed Democrats that there was a very real chance that Ken Paxton would be an even worse candidate than Ted Cruz, and his underperformance relative to Abbott is clear as day, and relative to the President of the United States is even more apparent. Paxton does not know competitiveness because he's never had to run that election before. He's never had to really put himself up on the bench here and say, I am the candidate who's running for my toss-up seat, because it has always been safe up until this year. Texas is a toss-up, but I can't act that Ken Paxton isn't making it worse for himself. He is the reason why this race is so competitive, because a strong Democrat in a strong national environment against a strong Republican does not make this race as competitive as it is. A state that the president won by 14 points necessitates the perfect combination of factors to let Democrats be in such a powerful position, and Ken Paxton is giving Democrats that bump. He is the reason this race is so infinitely close. And across the board here, we will find that he's not making it any better for himself across this country. And in the Texas Senate race, Ken Paxton, if he loses, will be in no small part due to his own inability to recognize the competitiveness of this election, the overconfidence that the president and Paxton and his campaign exude across the board here. And it is clear that they will be the ones who lose this election for themselves in a state Donald Trump won by double digits just a year and a half ago. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch, and then a playlist for my 2026 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.
The stock market's breaking records. Companies are telling investors they've never had it better. But when you look at your own paycheck, you might think, really? It sure doesn't feel like that. It doesn't feel like success is landing in my life. There's one number that can help explain this disconnect. Right now, out of every dollar that Americans earn in income, only 54 cents go to workers as wages. 54 cents. That's the lowest share. We call that Labor's share of national income. That's the lowest share all the way back to data since 1929. I've even tried to dig up earlier estimates from economic historians. This might be the lowest share we've ever seen back to the earliest numbers I found back in 1850. Let me put this in perspective. For most of the last century, workers got closer to 2/3 of every dollar of income the US economy produced. It matters because, look, there's two ways of having economic growth. The economy can lift everybody, but it could also send more and more of the gains to the folks who own businesses, shares and assets, while the families who live on paychecks get a smaller part of that upside. And so what I want to do today is dig into what's going on with Labor's share of income. This is going to be a story in 5 chapters. First, I want to tell you why a paycheck and a portfolio can tell you completely different stories about the same economy. Second, I said that Labor's share of national income is the lowest it's ever been. We're going to see if that can withstand a little bit of scrutiny as we think about questions about how best to account for what's going on. Third, let's talk about what's going on and why, how giant firms change the game. Fourth, bargaining power is going to be a big part of the story of who gets the gains. We're going to dig into it. And fifth, we're on the cusp of an AI moment. And so these issues we're discussing today are only going to become even more important. Let's begin. For decades, workers have gotten somewhere between 62 and 65 cents out of every dollar in income that the US economy generates. That amount, that's Labor's share, that's wages, it's health insurance, it's retirement contributions. I'm counting here the whole bundle of stuff that you get from having a job. Along the way, over those decades, there were recessions, there were booms. Still, the line bounced around, but still Labor's share was pretty stable. But then around about 2000, something started to happen. Labor's share started to slide. There was a brief bounce during the pandemic, and then it slid again. And in the past couple of years, it slid even further. Today, workers only get 54.4 cents out of every dollar the economy generates. That's the lowest ever recorded. I want to be clear, I'm not saying that every worker is getting poorer than they were 30 years ago. The economy's much bigger, so plenty of workers are earning more, and they're earning more after inflation, and they're earning more than their parents did. I'm making a different point. The economy grew, companies grew, the pie grew, but the share of that success, the way we slice the pie, the share of that arrives as paychecks, as returns to labour, stuff workers get, that shrank. Now, earlier this week, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent went on CNBC and said the K-shaped economy is over.
I got sick of hearing about this K-shaped economy.
Oh, God,
I can say here definitively, the K-shaped economy is over.
A couple of days later, he posted what he thought of as being his evidence. It was a graphic he posted on X to make the case. That graphic, it shows that workers in the bottom quartile of the wage distribution, low-wage workers, they saw their weekly earnings rise by 5.5%. Median worker saw their wages rise 4.6%, and at 75th percentile, the higher wage folks, their wage growth was 1.5%. Hey, Scott, this is good news. If lower paid workers are getting better raises, let's take the win. Although, Scott, next time, be a little more honest. Adjust the numbers for inflation. When you do that, you'll see that folks are barely keeping up. But here's where Bessent's defence goes wrong. He's answering a question about wages. He's only looking at what's happening to the wage distribution. That's not the same question as to what's happening about how income is divided in America. Because income includes wages, but it also includes dividends and rents and interest and capital gains and all the other forms of money you can make by owning a piece of a business. And those dollars, the dollars that go to workers versus capital, they land in very different places. The Treasury Department has estimated that the top 10% of American families, they get a pretty big share of labour income, 2/5. But when it comes to capital income, the very wealthy, they get an exorbitant share. They get a 4/5 of all positive capital income. And at the very top of the income distribution, this difference gets wild. The top 1%, the richest 1 in 100, they get 1/10 of labour income, which sounds pretty good for them, but they get over half of all capital income. And the top 1/10 of 1%, one household in 1,000, they get 4% of labour income. That's a bigger share, but they get 32% of capital income, an enormously disproportionate share. So both paychecks and portfolios are real, but they're not the same economy. For most families, if you want to think about the economic story of your life, it's primarily a story about wages. For people at the very top, ownership income is a much bigger deal. And for thinking about the US economy, it's worth noting it's ownership income that's grown dramatically, not labour income. Now comes the bit that normally puts everyone to sleep. Accounting. Accounting. I know it's boring, but it's important because whenever someone hands you an important economic statistic, you've got to ask some follow-up questions so you understand the story it's trying to tell. What did that number count? What did it leave out? Could some of this be some sort of measurement or accounting trick? And when it comes to measuring labour's share of income, these measurement issues are a really big deal. I see two big issues. First question is, are we counting money that nobody actually gets to take home? Look, let me explain. A company has to replace stuff that wears out. You know, the delivery vans get old or the machines break down in the factory, the software goes stale, the buildings need work. And so before a company divides up its income between workers and owners, some of that money actually has to go back towards keeping the business running. So maybe you don't want to think about that number, which economists call depreciation, as actually being stuff that makes capital richer. So let's take depreciation out of the equation. What I want to do is let's explore this together. So I want to fire up Stater because there's no better way to party with friends. And we're going to pull the relevant data directly from the Bureau of Economic Analysis. We're going to ask how much money corporations pay their workers in terms of wages and benefits. Then we're going to extract the number that the BEA calls gross value added. Yeah, they don't want you to understand this stuff, but what I want you to do is think about that as total income before we take out anything for wear and tear. Divide the first number by the second number, and that gives us what we call the gross labour share, the 54.4 cents in every dollar goes to workers that we started with. But now we want to cross-check that. So we go to the second calculation. We want to take depreciation out of the picture. It's not part of total income. And so then we're going to divide worker pay by what's left. And it's a concept that we would call net income. And here's where we land. While the gross labour share is 54%, the net labour share is 64%. That's higher, of course, because all we did was we changed the denominator in how much income we're counting as the denominator of the labour share. That's not my question. My question is what's happened to the labour share over time. So when we focus on this alternative measure, the net labour share, we also see that it too is at its lowest point in the data. Look, so here's the point. Depreciation changes the number, but it doesn't change the story. The worker share of income, however you measure it, is at the lowest level ever recorded. Now on to the second issue. It's essentially about asking, are we always putting income in the right bucket? It might seem it's obvious when something's a wage and when something's profits, but sometimes it's not so obvious. Think about running your own business. Maybe you own a successful consulting firm. You work hard, but it's your firm, you own it. So some of the money you take home is really a payment for your work. Some of it, though, is a return on the fact that you own the capital. You're running a business. These are your profits. So how can we figure out how much of your income is wages versus a return to capital? Well, the tax code tries. It says that owner-managers, you can't just call all your earnings profit. You have to pay yourself a wage, what it charmingly refers to as a reasonable wage. The problem is none of us really know what's reasonable. As the dollars come into your company, they don't come labelled, this was for your work, this is a return on your capital. It gets even more complicated because of taxes. You see, there are some forms of corporations where you pay lower taxes if you declare that your income is wage income. There are other types of businesses where you pay lower taxes if you declare that most of your income is profits. And then those tax rates change. And so all of that can actually confound things as changes in the tax code change how the exact same dollar bills are getting labelled as wages versus profits. Fortunately, we have economists who study this stuff. Matt Smith, Danny Yagan, Owen Zadar and Eric Zwick have dug into this. They find that tax-driven changes in how owner income gets reported and shifts in which businesses get counted as corporate businesses, these sorts of accounting changes, sometimes responding to changes in the tax code, they explain roughly 1/3 of the measured decline in Labor's share of income over recent decades. So if you dig into the accounting, you get a meaningful correction. So you don't want to take every wiggle on a chart totally seriously. Equally, even after you make this correction, it's clear that Labor's share of income has been declining and is probably still at an all-time low. So the size of the recent decline might be a bit overstated, but the decline's there and Labor share's at an all-time low. Okay, what are the stakes for you in this debate? How can we size it? Well, let's do a little bit of math together. I know you love it. America's entire economy produces roughly $30 trillion of income per year. So 1 percentage point of an economy that big is roughly $300 billion, which rounds out to being nearly $2,000 per American worker. So a decline in Labor's share of income of, say, let's go with 5 percentage points just to play it safe, means that the average American worker is receiving 5 times $2,000, that is $10,000 less in wage income every single year relative to what they would have gotten if Labor's share had stayed constant. Look, there was a lot of numbers running around, so let me just get to the bottom line there. There's a lot of money running around here. Hey, fun aside about averages, it also means if the average American worker is getting $10,000 less in wages, it means that the average American is also earning about $10,000 more per year in capital income. But that's a bit like saying that on average you and Warren Buffett are doing pretty well. On average you are, but that doesn't really tell the true story. Nobody's actually average, and for most folks, you probably experienced a big part of that shift away from wages, but very little of that shift towards capital, because most of that capital is owned by folks a whole lot richer than you or me. So why has Labor's share of national income shrunk so much? Let me give you the simplest story I know. Increasingly, we live in a Walmart world, and I don't mean Walmart specifically, but I mean an economy built around giant firms with incredible logistics, sophisticated software, global supply chains, and the ability to serve millions more customers without having to hire millions more workers. Let's simplify this. I want you to think about two different restaurants. One is a local place. There's a terrific cook, a couple of servers, one of those old-timey cash registers, and in the kitchen, all sorts of noise and pots banging. The other restaurant is a chain restaurant. It can spend millions of dollars on automated ordering, on central purchasing, on standardized kitchens, on delivery software, and a distant team somewhere that can tell the manager exactly how many chicken sandwiches you need to serve at 12:17 on a Tuesday. This chain, there's huge upfront costs. But once it pays those upfront costs, it can serve more meals without adding very many more workers at all. So the issue here is it's all about scale. And so you might have a local restaurant that treats its workers like family. In fact, the chain might do that too. But the chain can grow output a whole lot faster than it grows payroll. And if that chain takes business away from local restaurants, the whole industry becomes less dependent on labour. So what you could have is every individual restaurant still treats its workers well, but we've had a shift towards restaurants that give less of their income to their workers. And that's close to what economists Joachim Huebner and Pascal Restrepo find has been true for manufacturing and retail in the United States. And their story is big firms enabled by new technology. They've got the money and the scale to automate, expand, and they take a larger share of sales. Okay, that's not the whole story. Yes, technology matters. But technology doesn't get to decide who gets the gains. People do. When a company's become more productive, well, somebody has to decide what happens next. Do customers get lower prices? Do workers get higher pay? Do owners get higher profits? Does the government collect more tax to produce or provide better services? So usually it's some mixture of all of those things, but the mixture depends on the bargaining power of each of those groups. Look, workers used to capture more of the upside when their employers did well. Economists call this rent sharing. But over recent decades, weaker worker power has meant higher profitability for firms and their owners, and they haven't shared it with their workers. This declining worker power, it's not just about unions, although I do think unions are part of the story. It's also about whether you can easily quit and find another job. If you do, you've got a lot of bargaining power. But if your employer can move the work somewhere else, well, they've got more bargaining power. And so really you can think about this as, is this a labour market where giant companies have lots of workers competing for few jobs? There, the company gets power. Or do workers have lots of employers competing for them? Then the worker gets power. Well, globalisation plays an important role here. Look, let's step back. I want to start by acknowledging trade is cooperation. Trade can lower prices. It can give American firms access to bigger markets and create good jobs in export industries. But the fact that my employer could move my work elsewhere means that even if the work were to stay here, it weakens my or the workers' bargaining power. The deeper point is this: the way that our economic pie gets divided, it's not handed down from the heavens. Markets shape it. Rules shape it, and the people with power inside those markets, they shape it too. This is where we get to AI. Now, this whole question about what's going on with labour's share of income and the fact that it's declining, all of that started a long time before ChatGPT, before the iPhone. In fact, it started before I received my first ever email from a Nigerian prince. But AI is the next chapter in this story, and what AI does to the labour share may be one of the most critical factors for thinking about the future of our shared prosperity. You see, there's two ways this could go. Under the first, AI might make workers more productive. It can help a nurse get through their paperwork faster, help a teacher build more effective lesson plans, help a mechanic diagnose a problem, and help a small business do things that used to require a whole back office. That's AI working for people. That's one possibility. Let me remind you of a second possibility. AI can also chop jobs into smaller and smaller tasks, automate the parts that need skill and judgment, monitor workers more closely, and leave a smaller group of people doing more precarious work that's around the edges, that's peripheral to the main game. That would be a case of people working for AI. There's some economists, Doron Ajamoglu and Pascal Restrepo, they've given us a useful way for thinking about all of this. When technology takes a task away from a worker, labour's share of income can fall. But when technology creates valuable new tasks where people have a comparative advantage, labour share can rise. So You could think about AI as providing effectively a better kitchen for the cook, or AI could be a new system that allows the chain to automate the cook's job away. If AI makes workers more productive and workers share in the gains, that means our AI-fueled future will mean better jobs, higher pay, more time with your family, and a more secure future. But if AI mostly sends the gains to business owners while workers face thinner jobs and weaker bargaining power and fewer paths up, then we will have made the economy as a whole richer while making too many people's economic lives smaller. Okay, let's try and put this whole story back together. We started with the observation that workers are getting the smallest slice of our national economic pie ever recorded. We then did the honest accounting. We took out depreciation and adjusted for tax tricks. That record, it still stands. Economists have pieced together some parts of the underlying story as to why, and we're still learning more. But for now, maybe you can think of it as an economy of giant firms that grow sales faster than they grow payroll, and an economy in which workers have less power to demand their fair share as their companies gain more. And that's why the economy can look spectacular from the trading room floor, yet mediocre from your kitchen table. Both of these views, they're real, but they're looking at different slices of the same pie. And here's why that matters right now. AI is about to reinvent the kitchen in which we bake our economic pie. And how it goes is perhaps the most important economic question of our lifetimes. How we slice that pie, it won't be decided purely by algorithms, but also by rules, by markets, and by who has the power to bargain over the gains. In other words, who gets the big half and who gets the small half isn't determined by some other impersonal force. We have agency. We've been making these decisions for decades, and honestly, sometimes it looks like they haven't served working people well. And right now, the stakes are only getting higher. So the next time someone tells you the economy's booming or that the K-shaped economy is over, don't argue about their chart. Just ask them one simple question. Working for whom? Because a paycheck and a portfolio, they both tell you something true about America. But they're very different stories with very different heroes.
He was so incredibly incompetent that they felt that assassinating him might lead to actually a better leader coming forward. It may shock you to learn that this scene is not actually accurate, and Colonel Lander truly is one of the most memorable villains in recent movie history. Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Jen Howe. I have a PhD in war studies and I lecture about wars and why people fight in them. And today I'm going to be analysing the accuracy of Tarantino's Inglourious Bastards.
Fabelhaft, mein Lieber, fabelhaft. Ist Ihr bester Film bisher.
So, for those of you who've never seen this film, it's about Nazi-occupied France and the people there, as well as an armed unit led by Brad Pitt that go behind enemy lines into the heart of Nazi Europe.
We will be cruel to the Germans. And through our cruelty, they will know who we are.
It's also kind of set in an alternative reality as well. So even though the film is not known for its historical accuracy, there's a lot about this that actually can be kind of looked at a little bit more closely, and it's also heaps of fun.
Ooh, that's a bingo.
So let's go ahead and start watching it. Okay, so we're in 1941. So France will have been occupied for a year at that point. Okay, so obviously we have some things that we already know about the situation here, right? So 1941 France, so it's been maybe around a year since France fell. So France fell in 1940 to Germany. At this point in time, France is carved up. So you have the northern part under German occupation and the southern part kind of Free France or Vichy France. In the northern part, one of the reasons why these were kind of under occupation, it was industrial, so very heavily used for producing munitions, things like that, but also, of course, it was very close to Britain and Germany was trying to invade at that point in time. And Vichy France also was a sort of puppet state, basically, of the Nazi Party.
Est-ce la propriété de Perrier-Lapadite?
Je suis Perrier-Lapadite.
C'est un plaisir de vous rencontrer, Monsieur Lapadite. Je suis le colonel SS Hans Landa.
Okay, let's talk about Landa, who obviously is kind of like the star of this scene, really, and played incredibly well by Christoph Waltz. Yeah. So obviously he's in the SS. He's actually, I think, meant to be in the kind of intelligence branch of the SS, the SD. The SS were the main kind of security organization in Nazi Germany, and they were the ones who you would think of when you think of anyone really kind of perpetrating the Holocaust. They were present operating in camps, they operated deportations, they went and identified Jews as well.
Please tell me what you've heard.
I've heard that the Führer has put you in charge of rounding up the Jews left in France, who are either hiding or passing for Gentile.
The Führer couldn't have said it better himself.
I think one of my gripes with Landa's character is that he is a kind of like a cold-hearted psychopath, and it's a little bit of a trope. It doesn't really reflect the reality of a lot of people in the SS. So the SS was so big that, proportionate to the population, you could not have had that many people in it who were kind of sadistic or psychopathic. A lot of the people in the SS were just kind of ordinary people. They had no history of violence. They were often middle-aged men, some women as well. Before the war, they had sort of sweet shop, or they were bank clerks. So it was not like an organisation run by these kind of psychopaths necessarily. And I think this makes it even scarier, because a lot of what drives these people then becomes about things like following the group and not really standing up to things. And that in many ways is even worse, because it shows how easily people can kind of fall into these things.
There were 5 of them. The father, Jacob, wife, Miriam.
And okay, another big part of the scene is obviously the kind of bureaucratic side of things. Definitely, this was a big factor. And I think it actually kind of gets some of this right, not all of it, but some of it. So certainly coming in with this list, the Nazis did compile lists of Jewish families in the areas that they occupied. And we know, for instance, in France, they actually had a big kind of census of Jewish people. The local police in Paris gave them a big file with all the French families in it in Paris. They very much implemented the Holocaust using a lot of bureaucracy. So one of the ways that it was able to function so kind of easily was that you had this subdivision of roles within it, and that allowed people to kind of displace responsibility or displace blame for the things they were doing. So, I'm just the one compiling the list. I'm not the one deporting people. Or if you're the deporter, I'm just the one deporting people, but I'm not the one who's actually making the selections. And all of these roles kind of come together to form this basically system of violence and killing.
Now, if one were to determine what attribute the German people share with a beast, it would be the cunning and the predatory instinct of a hawk. But if one were to determine what attributes the Jews share with the beast, it would be that of the rat. The Führer and Goebbels' propaganda have said pretty much the same thing. But where our conclusions differ is I don't consider the comparison an insult.
Okay, and the speech obviously is very much kind of reminiscent of propaganda at that time. So where he's talking about how Jews are depicted as rodents, and this often was done by the Nazi Party, or they would talk about kind of illnesses, basically frame Jewish people as threatening the survival of Germany and thereby kind of justifying removing that population. This is really common in violent ideologies in general. And so, yeah, in that sense, that speech given by Landa definitely reflects that reality here.
And conduct a thorough search before I can officially cross your family's name off my list. And if there are any irregularities to be found, rest assured they will be. That is unless you have something to tell me that makes the conducting of a search unnecessary. I might add also that any information that makes the performance of my duty easier will not be met with punishment. Actually, quite the contrary. It will be met with reward. And that reward will be your family will cease to be harassed in any way by the German military during the rest of our occupation of your country.
Okay, so obviously he's incredibly polite for most of the scene. I know there's a lot of subtext there, but I guess you might be wondering, were German officers this polite in France? Yes and no. So, of course, again, it depended on who you were. If you were Jewish, certainly not. But initially, especially in the early days, they were actually told to be quite polite to the French population when they came in. And there's also records of people seeing German officers sort of give up their seats to women on the metro, for instance, and them holding doors open for people, chatting in cafes alongside Parisians, things like this. So they were definitely fairly kind of cordial in some ways to some people, though this did kind of really change the longer the war went on. Things became really fractious between the different groups. And I should add that the treatment of French people by Germans was very, very different to the Eastern Front or Eastern occupied territories, where the Nazi Party promoted this idea that people from Slavic countries were kind of racially below them. And so there were a lot of kind of racial policies that were more aggressive, a lot more brutality in Eastern Europe. So that is a bit of a difference there as well.
Monsieur Lapadit, je vous remercie. Pour le lait et pour votre hospitalité. Il me semble que nous en avons terminé. Ah, mesdames, je vous remercie pour le temps que vous m'avez consacré. Nous n'ennuierons pas votre famille plus longtemps. Donc, monsieur, mesdemoiselles, je prends congé de vous et je vous dis adieu.
I think one thing that this scene gets pretty inaccurate is that you wouldn't have had necessarily, I mean, you might have had an SS officer come on one of these raids in France, but it wasn't that common. And actually the team that came in to remove the people would have almost certainly been French police, not from the SS. One of the staggering things really about the Holocaust in France is that the SS worked incredibly closely with the local police there, and the local police would carry out these raids. Also, they wouldn't necessarily kind of kill people on sight. In fact, it wasn't all that common. It tended to be that they would deport them to Auschwitz or another concentration camp. Overall, there's around 28,000 people who are recorded as having hidden Jews across Europe during the Holocaust. So people did do it, but it just wasn't that common. And they would hide them under their floorboards, they would hide them in annexes all over different places in order to keep them safe. There's a really interesting story of actually an entire village in France hiding several thousand Jewish people during World War II. The village itself was only several thousand, so it literally doubled in size to hide those people. They would receive a heads up from a local priest who would call them the day before a Nazi raid and say, "Tomorrow morning, attention." And once they received that, they would send those Jewish people who were hiding in their village into the woods to be concealed. And this happened a few times across the war, and they managed to protect them. One of the reasons being that there were absolutely no denunciations in that village. So again, thinking like, actually a lot of the ways that people were found were through this denunciation process.
My name is Lieutenant Aldo Rain, and I'm putting together a special team. And And I need me 8 soldiers. 8 Jewish American soldiers. Now, y'all might have heard rumors about the Armada happening soon. Well, we'll be leaving a little earlier. We're gonna be dropped into France, dressed as civilians. And once we're in enemy territory, as a bushwhacking guerrilla army, we're gonna be doing one thing, and one thing only. Killing Nazis.
So some elements of the scene are certainly pure fiction, but there were actually very much real behind-the-lines missions that took place all throughout the war. And some of these actually did kind of focus on assassinating Nazi officials. So a really fascinating one, for instance, was that the British actually trained Czech soldiers to go into the Czech Republic, as it is now, and assassinate Reinhard Heydrich, who chaired the conference where they decided on the final solution. And Hitler's nickname for him was the man with the iron heart. So if you're being called that by Hitler, think about what type of character you likely are. Anyway, so they assassinated him, and that created a whole lot of kind of psychological damage within the Nazi party. So definitely things like this happened. And also there's another like super interesting group of people, the Ritchie Boys, who were, a lot of them, about 2,000 of them, Americans. So they were German and Austrian Jews who'd fled from Germany and basically kind of put an army uniform back on and went straight back in to fight against Hitler. And they used their German language to gather intelligence, also interrogate Nazis and other members of the German army as they kind of progressed through Europe. So this was after D-Day. And actually there's like this crazy statistic where about 60% of all actionable intelligence in World War II came from these Ritchie Boys. So they had major impact on the war. A lot of them actually went on to become interrogators in the Nuremberg trials as well. So there's definitely parallels. And I guess also one that is very interesting and similar to this is the Jewish Brigade, who were part of the British Army, and they fought their way up through Italy. And they also did actually form kind of vigilante groups after the war and sort of hunt down Nazi officials.
That's what I like to hear. But I got a word of warning for all you would-be warriors. When you join my command, you take on debit. A debit you owe me, personally. Each and every man under my command owes me 100 Nazi scalps. And I want my scalps.
This takes me to a big inaccuracy here, which is that there's absolutely no way that the American government would have been sending people in to scalp Nazi officials, because that would be considered a war crime. And even with the Jewish Brigade, when they formed these vigilante groups after the war, because a lot of them basically found out that their family members had perished in the Holocaust, so they would find these Nazi officials and say, we're going to take you to be questioned by a British officer, but then they would just drive that Nazi official out to the forest and kill them. And the British government massively put a stop to this when they found out, because obviously it needs to go through a kind of judicial process if you're looking through the lens of international law, for instance. So some parts of this are inspired by real stories, or at least resonate with reality, but then there's lots of it that definitely would never have happened.
Was alles soll ich von diesen Judenschweinen noch ertragen? Schlachten meine Männer ab wie Fliegen. Kennen Sie schon das neueste Gerücht, das Sie in Ihrem angstgetriebenen Wahn verbreiten? Der meine Männer mit einem Prügel totschlägt.
So we're now being introduced to Hitler, who is a little bit of a cartoon dictator in this film.
Die schlüpfen uns doch ständig durch die Finger wie Gespenster, die nach Belieben erscheinen und verschwinden können. Sie wollen beweisen, dass sie aus Fleisch und Blut sind. Dann bringen Sie mir. Ich werde sie nackt an ihren Füßen am Eiffelturm aufhängen.
Hanging from the Eiffel Tower. I don't know. I mean, there were some public executions, but that is a bit extreme, I think. So, is this accurate? So, obviously, it's a little bit caricatured, but at this point in time, Nazi Germany was really struggling. So, after Operation Barbarossa, everything was going downhill for them. So, they were losing the south, they had failed with the U-boat campaign. They also actually had lost air superiority, so they had both US, British and also Soviet Air Force pounding them round the clock. And they also, at this point, if this is now sort of post D-Day, they actually had the Allies sort of making their way towards them.
Ja, ein Führer. Befehl an alle in Frankreich stationierten deutschen Soldaten.
So at this point, it's fair to say that things were pretty bad in Germany. And in terms of his reaction to this, we know he did have pretty bad mood swings. He was recorded as having them, especially towards the end. And he became super paranoid because he'd also been the target